You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
We turn our attention now to the legislative session, specifically some of the proposals up for consideration on criminal justice reform. For more on that, we turn to Molly Davis with the Libertas Institute. Molly, great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Glenn.
Criminal justice reform, that is the topic we are going to focus on now. And that has been a focus up on Utah's Capitol Hill for several years now. We're even seeing it quite a bit on the national level with efforts from our own Utah Senator Mike Lee. But here locally, former Representative Hutchings had a massive reform bill a few years ago. We've seen Representative Snow and many others tackle this issue as well. Why is it such an important issue of our time, do you think?
Well, you're absolutely right. We've seen substantive efforts lately, and especially with Representative Hutchings' bill for Justice Reinvestment Initiative. It was effectively to ensure that we aren't wasting taxpayer dollars on putting people in jail who are just getting out and recidivating. We want to make sure that when we have these people in custody, that we are ensuring that they are going to be returning to society, being safe members. And over the past year, this criminal justice focus has really turned to police reform. The obvious case of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd over the past summer, that's really sparked the debate here and nationwide on police reform.
Yeah, we'll get into specific bills dealing with those two issues in just a minute. But real quick, as I mentioned, you're with Libertas Institute. What is it about the work you do that ties in and brings interest to your organization with criminal justice reform?
Well, Libertas Institute, we are a nonprofit that stands for civil liberties and people's constitutional rights here in Utah. So we work up on the Hill with legislators and with the public to ensure that all of those rights are protected and upheld, and criminal justice is a key facet to that. So among other issues, this is really taking importance and precedent, especially in a year like this.
Yeah, let's get into some of the specific proposals that lawmakers will be looking at this year. You already mentioned the big national ties, the big events that really brought these issues to the forefront. The first one is Forcible Entry. That will be sponsored by Representative Craig Hall. That is tied with the Breonna Taylor case. Tell us what that bill would do.
Yeah, so this bill would effectively ban no-knock warrants. So that's what we're talking about when we say forcible entry. And so we want to ensure that these warrants are not occurring unless it is absolutely necessary and there's imminent harm of death or serious bodily injury, because when we're talking about an individual's home and their most precious private place on earth, we're putting officers at extreme risk of danger, as well as individuals residing in the home, when we try to get them to go search someone's house for contraband or other criminal activity. It's dangerous for everyone, and as a protection measure, we are trying to ban them from being used, which some police departments have already done on their own across Utah.
And this is about time, giving an individual time to respond, correct?
Yeah, that's another part of it. For knock and announce warrants, when an officer approaches a house and announces their presence, they need to give substantial time for an individual to actually answer the door before they burst in unexpectedly. So that's another important part of the bill. Okay,
let's move on to another big issue that we saw play out over the summer, this one tied to the death of George Floyd. This is use of force, sponsored by Representative Birkeland. Talk about what that bill aims to do.
Yeah, so this bill has a number of important measures. Like you said, it's tied to the George Floyd case, but also more broadly, it would ban officers from using additional force on an individual who has already been properly restrained. It also creates a duty to intervene. So when an officer sees another officer on the scene breaking the law or using excessive force, and they would have to intervene without regard for chain of command. And there are also some portions of the bill that deal with de-escalation, as well as giving clear warning before resorting to lethal force. And it also protects officers' rights during investigations and ensures that prosecutors are looking at the whole picture when investigating these critical incidents. So it's not just the 2 minutes leading up to the incident, but also, you know, the entire event as a whole.
We hear a lot about de-escalating as of late, that needs to be part of the process. Should that be an officer's job, or we've heard talk of potentially being, an additional person coming out with the officer who's trained to be able to do that? Where does that responsibility lie?
I think it depends on the situation. It's a tricky thing to figure out legislatively. This bill that Representative Kara Birkeland is sponsoring does not deal with having social workers at the scene, which is what I think you're referring to. But I think that's a conversation that a lot of legislators are open to having. We want to make sure that safety on the streets of the individuals and the officers themselves are upheld, and that's possibly one way to accomplish that. Okay, let's talk about qualified immunity. This is a bill being run by House Minority Leader Brian King. Talk to us about that bill. Yeah, this bill is actually going to be a bipartisan effort. So as you said, not only Representative King, who is a Democrat, but also Republican Senator Cullimore is sponsoring it on the Senate floor. And so qualified immunity is a legal doctrine that is court created. Essentially, it shields civil liability of officers from wrongdoing. And so although they can be criminally held for wrongdoing, the individuals and the public have no recourse of action through civil courts because of this legal shield. And so what this bill would do, it would open the state court system up to civil rights violations, so people can bring these civil claims and hold them to some degree monetarily responsible for actions in excessive force cases, for example, which is just applicable to police officers, but qualified immunity doctrine as a whole applies to all government employees. Okay, so the key there is we're not focusing on criminal, but rather the civil element of that. Statewide police investigation standard. Tell us a little bit about that effort. Yeah, this bill is to ensure that police departments across the state are treating the individual officers on a similar level when they're investigating misconduct, as well as complaints made to the department about specific officers. So an element to this bill would be to ensure that the rights of the officers are upheld through every investigation, that they have similar kind of expectations statewide, no matter who employs them. And it also ensures that the state can handle these handle their responses in the same way through the Peace Officer Standards and Training Unit at the state level. Okay, one last bill we will get to real quick that your organization is working on is driver license suspensions. That is being run by Representative Corey Malloy. What is that all about? Yes, this is actually dealing a little bit more on the individual side, not so much with police, but this bill would stop the state from suspending people's driver licenses for unpaid court debt. We understand that if we want an individual to come into compliance with paying their fine and with the court orders, then we can't take away their reliable transportation to get to and from work every day. And so that's why Representative Malloy is sponsoring this bill, to ensure that people can still hold down transportation while working to pay off those fines in the first place. So the issue is you can't get to work, you obviously can't pay your court fines. Exactly, that's exactly right. Okay, this is a session like no other, no doubt about that. It's going to be interesting to see how things play out as the weeks go on. Molly Davis, we really appreciate your time today. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for having me. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.